Today we're sewing another free pattern. This is the Miranda top by Tiana's Closet. This is an elevated t-shirt pattern with feminine front gathers. This is a pattern that you could easily sew within an hour. You could construct this t-shirt using a serger. I'm going to be using my sewing machine for the full process. For all of the main seams, I'm using a narrow zigzag stitch with a width of 0.5 millimeters and a length of 2.5. For my hems for the bottoms of the sleeves and the bottom of the t-shirt, I'm choosing a wider zigzag stitch of about 2.5 millimeters by 2.5 millimeters. And for attaching the neckband, I'm using a lightning bolt stitch. If you're like me and you prefer the look of a serged finish inside of your knit garments, you can also accomplish this using your regular sewing machine. I'm going to be demonstrating finishing the raw edges using an overcast stitch and an overcast foot. I hope you join me today in sewing this easy and very comfortable tee. Let's get started. Along the bottom of your upper front piece, we have notches indicating where we're going to be doing our gathering. Using the longest stitch on your machine and about a 1/4 inch seam allowance, sew from notch to notch, leaving thread tails on both sides so that we have threads to pull for gathering. Here is the top edge of my lower front piece. Place the bottom gathered edge of your upper front piece right sides together with the top edge of your lower front piece. Match the centers and the notches and pin in place. Then pull your basting stitches so the upper front piece fits the lower front piece. Once it fits, pin in place and repeat on the other side of the center. And then continue pinning from your gathering to the side seams. And then sew this seam with a 3/8 inch seam allowance and press the seam down toward the bottom of the garment. Now that the seam is sewn and pressed down toward the bottom of the garment, we're going to top stitch that seam allowance in place. I'm going to sew from the front of the garment along the top edge of the bottom piece with about 1/8 or a 1/4 inch seam allowance using a stretch stitch. You could also use a twin needle or your cover stitch machine. Place your two lower back pieces right sides together along their center seam and pin in place. Sew the center seam with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, then you can optionally finish those raw edges and press the seam to one side. Now that the lower back pieces are joined together, you can place your upper back piece right sides together with the top of the lower back piece, matching your centers and pin in place. Sew this seam with a 3/8 inch seam allowance and press the seam down toward the bottom of the garment. Place your front and back bodice pieces right sides together and pin your shoulder seams. And then we'll also pin the side seams. Then we'll sew our side seams and the shoulder seams with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and then you also have the option of finishing those raw edges together for each of your seams. You could also choose to press those side seams and shoulder seams open. The hem allowance for the bottom of the blouse is 1 inch. I'm going to take the bottom raw edge and press it to the wrong side by 1 inch all the way around. Now that the bottom hem is pressed, you can use a twin needle, your cover stitch, or a regular zigzag stitch to secure that hem in place close to the raw edge all the way around. For the bottoms of both of my sleeves, I've gone ahead and pre-pressed the hem in place, folding and pressing the raw edge of the fabric to the wrong side by 1/2 inch. Then I'll open out that fold for now and fold the sleeve in half right sides together with itself. And pin the underarm seam. And do this for both sleeves. Sew both underarm seams with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, then you have the option of either finishing those seams together or pressing them open. Then we'll place each sleeve and its corresponding armhole right sides together, matching the underarm seams, and pin in place. The notch on each sleeve should match with your back bodice piece. Then sew your sleeve into the armhole with a 3/8 inch seam allowance and finish the raw edges together if you want. Then repeat for the opposite sleeve. Now that both of our sleeves are attached, we can hem the sleeves. Fold the raw edges of the sleeves back to the wrong side along your pre-pressed crease. Hem the bottoms of both sleeves in the exact same way as you chose to hem the bottom of the bodice. Fold your neckband in half, right sides together, and sew the short edge with a 3/8 inch seam allowance and press the seam open. Once that's sewn and pressed open, fold your neckband lengthwise, wrong sides together, and give those top edges a press. And then mark the quarter points along the bottom raw edge of the neckband. Also mark the quarter points of the neckline. Place the collar and the neckline right sides together, matching your quarter points, and pin in place. Then sew the neckband to the neckline with a 3/8 inch seam allowance using your preferred stretch stitch. I'm going to be using a lightning bolt stitch. Once the neckband is attached and the seam allowance is pressed down toward the bottom of the garment, we want to top stitch that seam allowance in place all the way around, just as we did to finish the seam for the top bodice earlier. Give everything a final press and your t-shirt is complete. Thank you for watching this sew along. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any full-length sewing tutorials, and I'll see you in the next video.